Auzubillahiminashaitanirrajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum viewers. I'm your host Faiza Naqvi with a prayer. May Allah keep you all safe, healthy and blessed. And may Allah fill this world with peace and justice, inshallah. Ameen. Today, the topic we are about to discuss is related to the students' encampment which is going on around the globe, especially in America, UK, Europe, Canada. And there are hundreds of the university students who are showing solidarity and standing against the brutal killing of innocent people of Gaza, and they are demanding a divestment from the Israeli companies from their universities, and they are protesting in favor of the oppressed Palestinians. So, in this during these encampments, we have seen the letter has come from a supreme leader who has acknowledged their efforts, and he has appreciated the efforts students of these universities are making towards the truth and justice and peace for humanity at large, because it's not just the Gaza people of Gaza or Palestine, it's about the humanity at large. It's the time when there is a situation going on, and that situation is decolonization of humanity wherever it is. So it is really painful to see the people, children, women and families brutally being killed and butchered and slaughtered in this whole kind of war, which is a war from the Israeli perspective, but it is a genocide. And during this genocide, the student solidarity with the Palestinian people has even been acknowledged by the people of Palestine as well, and they showed their love for them as well. So it is the kind of very strong connection which we can see between them and the people around the globe. So we will discuss it about in further detail, especially the letter which has been written by Reverend Muslim's Supreme Leader of Iran and Supreme Leader of Iran, Syed Khamenei, to the students of these universities, and what he has said in that letter, and why did he chose this time to write this, and how important it is. We will discuss it further in detail. We do have a very prestigious guest with us. We do have Clive McKenzie, who is a researcher of political economy and human condition, who blogs at outerside.org. Hi, Clive. I'm really honored to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time. And we do have Sister Sundar Asad from Lebanon, and she is a journalist and writer as well. And I'm really honored to have you on the show, Sister Sundar. Thank you so much for your time as well. And Syed Mohsin Abbas, who is journalist, analyst, and researcher. Assalamu alaikum to all, and hello, and thank you so much, Mohsin Bhai, for your time as well. First of all, I would start from Mohsin Bhai, from you, just to give a start so that you can start the discussion. How do you see the students' encampment going on around the globe? Especially, there are even more universities who are participating, even in UK, and it is being said that it's going to reach the Europe as well. So until and unless obviously this war in Gaza and Palestine is over, or there is some kind of ceasefire or something like that. So how do you see this act from the students or globally, and when this letter has come, how much important this letter is for these students, and what importance does it have inside it?
Yeah, it's a fascinating phenomena. On the very superficial level, it's a good thing that young people have a conscience, and they've woken up and they've carried out these kind of encampments, and they are getting mobilized. I recall, of course, the struggle against the Vietnam War back in the 70s, when I was very, very young, and it had an impact on me as a child. So clearly, when these things happen on such a mass scale, they also sent out a kind of vibration, a kind of energy, which is really linked to justice and truth and all the good values. What human beings actually primordially, I believe, are, which is good. and we veer towards good. But the letter by Imam Khamenei is a kind of encouragement, a kind of reaching out, a connection with that very apparent desire of young people to be on the right side of the moral issue that is raised by Zionism's absolute destruction of the Palestinians. So that's on one level, and Ayatollah Khamenei has seen it fit to reach out to them and to say what? He said specifically that they must become familiar with particularly the Holy Quran. And this resonates with an earlier message in 2015 which he sent, in which he's trying to really put across Islam as an ethical blueprint and set of principles by which he obviously operates not only his life, but is trying to steer the Islamic Republic of Iran and other Muslims towards as well. And he said the two verses he focused on, one was do not oppress and do not be oppressed. This is chapter 2, verse 279. So he focuses very much on that. And then the second verse he quotes is, so be steadfast as you've been commanded. That's chapter 11, verse 112. So these two verses are very significant that he chooses these. One is that the encouragement for them to be on the right side of history, not to be part of the side of oppression, and to be with the oppressed. And I think he says this is our commonality with you. And of course, it's an honorable struggle. He says their struggle is honorable, and that they're going to face ruthless pressure from their government, and are facing ruthless pressure, which is because they are supporting the brutal Zionist regime and what I'd describe as the money power order around the world. But he also talks about understanding and the idea that they're going to be castigated or pigeonholed and targeted, and he's offering the unity and the resistance front as a backup. Now that's really fascinating, because hitherto the axis of resistance relates to Muslim nations, particularly in West Asia, fighting the Zionist Anglo-sphere, if you like, the Anglo-Zionist empire. It's not really been a struggle which is linked to the West necessarily, or people in the West. But here what Ayatollah Khamenei is saying is, look, your struggle for justice is the same as our struggle for justice, because we've been fighting this Zionism in West Asia now for 40 years or longer. The Palestinians have been fighting it longer, the Iranians since 1979 and the revolution. So he's saying that actually you are now part of this resistance front, and the resistance front is against a tyranny which is common to all humankind, and tyranny isn't just against Palestinians. The Palestinian example is just one very stark, realization of a much wider tyranny that is a much wider oppression, which this network of Anglo-Zionist imperialists or money men have been doing with humankind since time immemorial. But very specifically now, it's linked to the hyper-capitalist economies. It's linked to the industrial military complex. It's linked to the deep state of which is all based primarily in Western capitals, but also beyond. Now, that's what Ayatollah Khamenei is doing. He's really, in a way, reaching out and saying, look, we're part of the same struggle, and this Zionist this global Zionist parasite elitism is something that we share as a common enemy, and that he guides them to the Quran. He says, look, if you want inspiration, go to the Quran directly, and you will find it there. And comparing it quickly, to what he said in 2015. Well, at that time, he focused very much on the campaign, which started actually pretty much in 1979 onward. When the Islamic Revolution in Iran occurred, the West immediately triggered their Kafiri, Wahhabi, Zio Arab friends and puppets in West Asia to unleash sectarianism, to unleash all sorts of ethnic differences between Persian and Arab, to release basically a divide and conquer strategy. They unleashed wars between Saddam Hussein and Iran, and subsequently you've seen Gulf War upon Gulf War. You've seen them launch it against Saddam and then use the Arab Spring as an excuse. They've got the wars of terror, which are a kind of a twist on what they call their war on terrorism. And in fact, Khamenei actually focused on the wars of terrorism and ISIS and Al Qaeda and all of the other proxies, Al Junjala and the ISIS Khorasan, or the other MKO type terrorists, the secular terrorists, which all have their roots going back to Washington DC and to the hallowed halls of Anglo-Zionist imperialism. He pointed to them back then to say, look, you the youth in the West must recognize that your leaders and your political circles and your economic powerhouses are all the ones who are perpetrating and producing this terror amongst us. That's what then causes immigration. It causes economic hardship for people in the global South. They come migrating into your territories, and then they blame the migrants for being the problem in the West as well. And on top of that, of course, what he's hinting at is that these globalists, these global terrorists, also were and are rolling out poverty. They're rolling out economic hardship. They're rolling out insecurity, unemployment within the West. I only sat in a conversation yesterday with my friend Khalid here in Watford, who's running in the Workers' Party campaign, and he went through an interesting economic appraisal of what they did. The subprime scandal, when they pulled the economic plug on the West, was done by the same cabalists, the same cabal itself. And they did it in such a way where they seem to have ripped off maybe hundreds of billions of dollars or pounds in order to really give the rich more money. And they did it by ripping off the West. I'm sure Clive will fill us on this. But it's not just globalist wars on Muslims or in the West, in West Asia, which is the problem, which Ayatollah Khamenei is pointing to. He's talking about a much wider war, which the youth in the West have to wake up, and the moral people in the West have to wake up to. And perhaps now, 2015, well, it's 9 years or 10 years since those first letters, and it seems as though now the West, certain segments of the West too, are beginning to recognize the criminality and the corruption and the actual self-destructive nature of Tory parties, Labour parties, Democrats. They pour money into Ukraine for wars which the West cannot benefit from, but rather they cause an energy crisis here, they cause inflation, and cause all sorts of hardship here, and they also have openly, brazenly supported Israel and its genocide on the Gazans. These two things are beginning to converge, and a large number of people in the West are also awakening to the reality, as are people in the East.
Thank you, Muslim. How about Mr. Clive? I would request your analysis on the letter. How do you see this letter when a supreme leader of Islamic Republic of Iran, for instance, and a leader who is connected to the revolution of Islam as well, based on the Islamic ideology, is writing a letter to the people, students, especially the students of the West, and they are not necessarily all Muslims, obviously, they are related to different races, color and creed and all that, who are fighting for justice and truth, who are standing up in favor of the oppressed people of Palestine. So how do you see the act from the student and the letter by a leader who represents Islam and who is the biggest enemy, for instance, of America in one way, as he is known for that, in the West? So what are your thoughts, and how do you see this letter, how important it is, and what is the more interesting factor in that letter, what he is trying to do from that letter, especially from Western point of view? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think largely I would concur with what Moses said in terms of identifying the key points of the letter. I would tend to look at this in a slightly different way, in as much as I think I've said before that these demonstrations are to some extent orchestrated and creating a theatrical spectacle, if you like, albeit that there are many sincere and committed people who are clearly drawn to the idea of what has taken place. But I think we need to look at this, as Mosen suggests, in a global context. And maybe that's the importance of the letter, that this is a war not between peoples, but on people, all people. And I think it's quite difficult to convey to people the extent to which we live on a human farm. And quite simply, the structure, and I'm not talking about individual governments or ideologies or whatever, although those ideologies of destruction are evident, it's more about the structure that has facilitated this. And insofar as the structure is now in a state of slow motion decline and an accelerating collapse, Mosen alluded to the 2008 subprime crisis. That and other crises before have been opportunities to put in place the mechanisms that they're trying to implement. So this goes way beyond kinetic warfare in the Middle East and Ukraine. It goes into the whole depth of society and everybody's activities. So whether you're talking about, Mosen talked about the war on terror, which was clearly created, and it's fully documented, it was created to facilitate these wars and division. That was back in the 1990s. So there's the war aspect, and I think 9/11 was the spectacle that galvanized people either into a state of fear or a state of aggression, and that pattern has followed ever since, as Mosen has articulated. We then, in the background, through the latter half of the last century, but accelerating through the early part of this century, this notion of we are the cause of global catastrophe in terms of climate change. That is a narrative that has no substance in reality, and yet what has been done on the back of that misunderstanding or misdirection has been to further impoverish and harness our energy and resources. And the green agenda on its own is a suicidal strategy for mankind. Carbon dioxide is an essential part of our living. At the moment, carbon dioxide is about 400 parts per million. Below 150, nothing grows and we all die. So that is another aspect of this war on us all. They're effectively saying that we are the problem, and this is also tied in with a long-standing eugenics idea that reduces the population of the planet. We then get the COVID narrative, which was clearly false, and it's even emerging into the mainstream. We are not our makeup. We are extremely complex beings of energy, and we are not susceptible to viruses, germs, etc. These are myths. We live in a toxic environment. We get poor quality food. We're taking pharmaceuticals that have many, many detrimental effects. There are toxins in perfumes, soaps, anything you name, even the clothes you wear. If you wear plastic or nylon or whatever oil derivative clothes, they're not good for you. All of these things are attacks on our being. So where we're at the moment, we're in the final death throes of this system collapse, if you like. And in the same way that a wild animal, when trapped, becomes more desperate and dangerous, that's where we are. So they're playing the war card. Now, one of the other common misconceptions that originated in my early childhood was this idea of mutually assured destruction. And I was listening to George Galloway earlier interviewing Scott Ritter, and they were talking about this is the start of, or potentially the start of, a nuclear holocaust that will wipe out the whole of humanity. There are many reasons to suggest, and certainly the evidence would point in that direction, that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were faked. And I'm not going to go into the detail, but had a nuclear explosion of the magnitude that was claimed actually occurred in either of those cities, you wouldn't have seen shadows on concrete because the concrete would have vaporized. The sort of temperatures that are generated through thermonuclear reactions are greatly in excess. So I remember as a child being told that there was this great threat. We had the Bay of Pigs disaster, we had missiles in Cuba potentially aimed at the United States, not dissimilar incidentally to what NATO is trying to do in Ukraine in the other direction, to put missiles on Russia's border essentially. So all of these narratives are all about fear. So whether you're talking about the war on terror, statistically the chances of being a casualty or a target of terrorism are analogous to dying from a hornet, wasp or bee sting, and you're 6 more times more likely to die in the bath. So that was a threat, if you like, that was blown out of all proportion, and not to mention the fact that most of the time it was fomented by the very powers who said they were going to prevent terrorism. We then have the climate change narrative, another fear, children growing up thinking that they are a catastrophe that is going to wipe out civilization. Another wholly false narrative to induce fear. The COVID narrative was clearly about fear. Those of us who knew better had no fear of hugging, kissing, talking, or doing any of the things that we supposedly weren't to do. So all of these things, and to come on to, if you like, the final strand of this, which in many respects is economic warfare and kinetic warfare across the world, is mass migration. That is another tool to provoke division and chaos, basically. And all of these things are now coming together. They've been accumulating over the last 20 years. But the system is clearly failing because more and more people are recognizing they're turning their back on fear and know that the universe runs on love. That is the overriding guiding principle of the universe. For my part, I do not subscribe to a monotheistic religion with an overarching God, but I see God as being in everything, in creation, and there are rules of the universe, and if you follow the rules of the universe, then you thrive. And essentially the primary rule is love. In other words, look after everybody else better than you would look after yourself, and then we're all looked after. So all of these things are coming to a head, and people are beginning to realize that, one, the governments aren't really in power, and even if they cling on to that myth, they recognize the criminality that is in their faces and how they are being increasingly put under the thumbscrews financially, socially, psychologically, and emotionally. But once you recognize what's being done to us all, then it's very easy to gather the strength inwardly to face it down, and more people are doing that. So to come back to the letter, I think it is useful, but I don't necessarily see that the demonstrations of themselves are the issue. I think it's much more about looking inwards to ourselves as to what our true values are. Do we live by love? Do we live by what we're supposed to live? Have we been so seduced by the money environment that we've lived in for the last 3,000 to 5,000 years that we no longer see that? I think that the money system in its state of collapse isn't actually, we don't need to replace the system that's there. We need to recognize that we need a totally different way of organizing ourselves. And we now have the technical capability that didn't exist when money was adopted. Prior to money being adopted, and humans have been around for some 300,000 years, prior to that we didn't use money or barter. Barter may have happened, but it wasn't how we sustained ourselves. We lived by understanding the capabilities, the capacities, the needs, the skills, the wisdom and experience of all those within our circle. Could be a tribe, a family, and we still do that today. There was no mechanism or tool available to extend that understanding and that relationship beyond the boundaries of the tribe. Maximum, say, 150 people. Once you went beyond that, how could you possibly retain all of that information about every individual outside your circle? So money was adopted as a very effective, if you like, means of substituting that knowledge with a proxy. And the proxy is money, and the value is agreed upon. The problem is that money is now the only value that we recognize, and everything is translated into money, and it's a very poor representation of the unique values that everybody has. But we now have the technology. Companies like Facebook, eBay, Amazon, Google, etc., they have created huge value out of the unique capture of data from all of us. The only problem is that only they have access and control of it. All that needs to happen, and it will happen because these tools came from an open source environment. They weren't created by these companies. They've colonized a lot of that technology. All that needs to happen is we need to open source that data that we use for almost everything these days to actually recreate the dynamic that we have within families, within small groups, where we can treat with anyone in the world, regardless of their shape, colour, language, whatever, as if they were a member of our family. And it won't be a question of relying on exchange, because the new money system that they're planning isn't going to actually solve the problem of those who are hard up, destitute, starving, poverty. If they have anything to exchange, then the new money system isn't going to make any difference. Whereas a human value system that recognises every individual's unique characteristics, their attributes, their needs and their capacities, then we can live as a global family. It sounds unrealistic, but everything is in place to actually do this. And all we need is the will to recognise that our enemies are not Russia or Iran or America or Israel. Our enemies are the structure under which we live, which force these behaviours, these divisive, destructive and abusive behaviours, were forced upon us by the structure of money. And that is going to change. It is changing already. In local communities, people are relying far less on money to negotiate relationships, transactions. I belong to health groups, war groups, all sorts of groups of people. Yes, we need money for things that we can't produce for ourselves, but we share freely. We give money to each other. We do things not expecting anything in return, because we know that it is for the greater good, and if it's for the greater good, it's for the good of each individual within the group. And that is the ethos that will expand across the globe.
Thank you so much, Mr. Clive. So what I could understand from the discussion from Syed Mohsin and you is somehow like not 100%, but somehow it's like we are being controlled by kind of money mafias behind these politicians, and who are controlling even our choices, everyday choices we are making, and the things we are doing, and everything which is related to our being. And the uh, war in Gaza, or the genocide in the Gaza, is somehow is trying to awaken us from all the sleep we used to have, and it is creating that awakening which was supposed to have, we should have before, for instance. And now it's the high time to do that as well. And when young students are in kind of through these encampments, understanding these kind of things, they are trying to figure out the truth as well. So seeking the truth is the first way forward. And when it comes to the truth, then obviously this letter can prove itself like as a very good guide for the students and everyone who might read it and understand it, and try to dig out the facts from it. So, Sister Miss, what are your thoughts? As obviously you are in Lebanon and you are watching things very closely as well. So, what are your thoughts about the encampments around the globe from the young students who are like obviously kind of sacrificing their careers, they are being brutally treated by the police, and they are like facing so much as well. So this kind of letter, how does it feel to you, and what are your overall thoughts, conclusive thoughts on this letter and the encampments going on and in this time?
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me. Salvation from South Lebanon, where we are now under the Israeli aggression on daily basis. We are bombarded by the Zionist occupation. Actually, when we return to the letter, we reflect on the letter of the Supreme Leader, we must perhaps we must focus on something which is quite important, which is why the leader of the one of the most successful revolutions across the globe addresses the youth. Actually, the leader, this isn't the first letter that Syed
Sister, if you could be a little louder as well, because I think so there is some noise coming
yes.
behind somewhere. I don't know from where it is coming, but if you can be a
This is
little louder.
not the first letter that the leader writes for the youth of the West, just because it's related to something in which the Islamic revolution, which is the essence of the genuine Islam which don't separate between politics and between religion, focuses a lot on the youth and consider them as the bedrock of the humanitarian civilization and the bedrock of any revolution across the globe. If we see now what is happening in Gaza, those who are leading those heroic battles in Gaza and defending the children and the women of Gaza are basically, most of them are youth, and those are the generation who the West has failed to brainwash. You know that the West has tried in various ways into deceiving the youth, especially here in West Asia and Palestine and Lebanon, that we must coexist with this colonial apartheid regime and that resistance can't make a solution, and the only way to live in your land is to submit and to surrender to this hegemonic policy of the West and of the Zionist occupation. But those have resorted to resist, to fight against the occupation, and to make history. The same is happening in the West. Those youth students who are now protesting in the West against the policies of their arrogant administration and arrogant governments know the price of resisting these policies and know that they will be punished, but they have become clear to something that the governments have long been deceiving, like promoting Islamophobia, promoting trying to show the resistance as terrorist groups. Those youth have realized the true face of their government, that the government is a bloody regime who commit crimes in our countries, who kill our youth, who all the time try to find a way to occupy us, to promote feminist views, to promote the LGBTQ thoughts in order to promote moral corruption among our societies. But as I have mentioned earlier, today those who are leading the heroic operation, whether in Gaza or here in South Lebanon, are the youth. Are the youth who believe that it's time to make an end to this colonial regime, to fight against colonialism, to fight against imperialism, because we can't submit to these imperialist governments who loot our riches, who plunder our wealth, who kill our kids, and we don't trust the West. So what's the youth in the West, because he truly believes that those will change the history, will change the face of history. And as I've mentioned, that this is part and parcel of the genuine Islam that believes in the capability of the youth in making the true history, promising history. And as we tomorrow we will commemorate the martyrdom of the ninth Shia Imam al Jawad. We know that if we refer to on the political life of Imam al Jawad, who he himself was a youth, but he has been able to fight against the uh, Abbasid at that time, and to teach us as youth how to fight against imperialism, how to stand for the oppressed, whether they are in West Asia and in Africa, in Latin America, or either in the West, because the youth in the West themselves are oppressed. Their government loot them by forcing them to pay taxes in order to kill us here in West Asia. So now it's time to wake up, it's time to resist, and it's time to make history free from all the hegemonic powers and the colonialist powers.
Thank you, sister. Sister, I would move on to Mohsin Bhai. So, Mohsin Bhai, how do you see the comments from the? I have seen the letter, and it was saying like now you have formed the resistance, and for instance, there is a kind of what exact words are you have formed a branch of the resistance front and have begun an honorable struggle in the face of your government ruthless pressure. So, how do you see these words chosen by Ayatollah Khamenei? So, what do you think? What kind of message it conveys, and how empowering they are, and how it is important to sacrificing your career. Obviously, these students have paid millions of, I mean, thousands of dollars as fee, and they are going to have so much pressure from the university students, and their future is on at stake as well. So this is not something very simple, and so what do you think, these kind of words, how much encouragement and positivity they deliver, and the kind of messages they deliver in that fight for truth and justice?
Well, I think the clue lies in, first of all, the letter he sent in 2015, which I'll come on to. I'll give you a little quote from Ayatollah Khamenei there. But you see, everybody fights these individual wars. You know, somebody is fighting the class war somebody is fighting a particular government, somebody might be resisting a particular lifestyle that's being imposed on them, somebody may be resisting, their the imposition of gender, personas on each other by establishments, etc. Somebody might be fighting sectarian wars. Others are fighting religious, inter-religious wars. Some are fighting secularism. You see, everybody is engaged in some kind of struggle, and it seems that these individual struggles are all very well, but if you don't understand the overall context of the wider struggle, the fact that all of these struggles, that all of these problems, all of these divisions, all of these narratives, all these agendas emanate and originate from one, source, that is a problematic, because then you don't have a holistic understanding of what you're fighting against. If you just fight your individual wars, even if it's the war of keeping your family alive, in Palestine, or the war of feeding your children, or the war of trying to get equality of women, or wherever in a certain part of the world, or whatever struggle for justice you're involved in, if it isn't contextualized by the overarching understanding of what's going on, then you don't have a wisdom. You're not struggling with wisdom. You're struggling in a reactionary way based on your own particular, needs and with your own prejudices, and perhaps with the limitation of the knowledge you have. I see many of these struggles really. This is the problem with them, and this is why it's so easy to hijack them. It's so easy to engineer them and orchestrate them in a direction which is takes them away from whatever the original intention was. You've seen that with the feminist movement. We've seen that, from the suffragettes to the feminist movement you have today, it's a completely different movement because it's been hijacked by the powers that be, whoever you want to point your finger at with that. The movements around religion, etc. Of course, many religions, once they're institutionalized, they get hijacked and they're used by the forces, whether it's Islam or whether it's Christianity. You can cite instances of how imperialism and money power has hijacked many of these movements. So what I would argue is that, first of all, what Imam Khamenei is asking for is also a change of mentality. And he says in his previous letter, and I'll quote, he says, "Dear youth, I expect you to change this hypocrisy-infested mentality at present or in the future. A mentality whose art is covering up far-fetched goals and embellishing sly intentions. And in my view, the first step to establish security and calm, to reform this violence-breeding mentality, particularly in the West and in the corridors of power in the West, is the awakening of a kind of a moral conscience. And as long as the double standards dominate Western policy and their puppets in the East as well, then as long as this happens, then terrorism is basically going to divide us, and they can use all forms of terrorism: economic terrorism, cultural terrorism, political terrorism, military terrorism, deep state terrorism. There are many forms of terrorism which Clive has outlined and I pointed to earlier, which people need to be aware of. But all of these things end up, Imam Khamenei says, giving governments and powerful institutions, globalist powerful institutions, the power and the precedence with imposing their agendas and policies over human and moral values. So he sees the root of all these terrorisms as the giving away of that power, of that control to people who essentially have no regard for morality, human values, ethics, our primordial, yearning for the fitrah. Now, the model which Imam Khamenei points to, and I know Clive is elucidating a very different model and a change of the system, which I totally subscribe to as well. Imam Khamenei's point to the youth is that you're fresh, you're not corrupted by the system so much. You're also not so much in fear because you don't have those mortgages and all those things that the people adopt, which then end up making them shut their mouths and do as they're told, and to fear and to be demoralized, as was hinted earlier. So all those afflictions which get a grip of the adults in middle age and beyond aren't things which young people are totally afflicted by. Though what you have to recognize now is also that, just take student fees here in the West as an example, that you're in £45,000 debt if you're a student before you've come out of university. Before you even earn anything, you're already in debt to the system. Then you go and try and buy a house and you're in debt to the system even more. And you see how debt becomes like a major tool of control. Debt combined with hyper-materialistic yearnings, the addictions which then they roll out, whether it's your sexual porn addictions, or whether it's your addictions for new food, or whether it's your addictions for clothes, or an addiction for having houses, or addiction for acknowledgement and power and prestige. These are addictions which, again, Imam Khamenei would argue, and he does, that actually turn to the Quran, turn to Islam, because Islam does have a blueprint, it does have a template of those moral values, because Islam is rooted we would obviously argue, in the divine, in a morality which would ultimately urge people to become their optimal selves. That's the purpose of human beings on this world, is to become the optimal moral, ethical individuals that they can be. It's not simply just to eat and to survive and to have material things. There's a higher, more sort of honorable and more noble goal that human beings have to attain, which is something he's saying, well, Islam is the quickest way of getting there. And with Islam, he'll point to the society which the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, managed to create for about 10 years, and maybe Imam Ali alayhi salam for about 4 years, did actually try to implement. And even there, one has to say, there was a lot of opposition. People didn't all go with the agenda. They tried to kill the Prophet. They tried to destroy his system. They were hypocrites who undermined his economics, his politics. They undermined his messages of love and fraternity and destruction of ego for the betterment of society. So, but you still nonetheless have to look at these templates, and Islam is one of the templates which we would argue is in the mix to say that is the template for the alternative system, the system that would destroy the hegemonic imperialist ones that you have. Though Muslims themselves, I have to confess, have fallen for the same trap. Muawiyah, for instance, completely openly adopted the hegemonic imperialist overlordship systems that existed before him, and tried to subvert Islam and its essential messages away from their essence. And he too set a template, a blueprint, which was really one of hegemony and power and rapacious plunder, I would argue. And I think that many of the Muslims went down that direction, and you see the likes of bin Salman and many of the despots today still enacting that. So we need to reconnect to what the Prophet did. He went, for instance, into Medina. He didn't when he looked at the competition around markets and selling products, he saw that the Jews of Medina were monopolizing everything, for instance. And that monopoly, he looked at it, he didn't smash it, he didn't take away all their bazaars and whatnot. He empowered, through his skills in business, he empowered the nomadic Arabs, the Bedouins, to create their own market. And he supported them in building this other market. And this market then, when it started operating, it created competition, a healthy competition, prices went down, everything became more reasonable. So you see, his approach was very much reforming, it was very much empowering those who were disempowered, and it was also correcting those who were rapaciously trying to dominate the system. For instance, the Jews operated usury systems at that time in Medina, and he banned usury completely. So you couldn't just continue advancing your economic power as a rich person by charging astronomical interest or usury on others and subjugating people in that way. So those are just one example. That's one example. The example of the environment, he saw that they were trying to plunder the environment in Medina and exploit it to the point where it would no longer be sustainable. In a desert arena, you had to be careful about water, you had to be careful about the produce you had. So what he did was that he created hibas, where he would conservation areas where no hunting took place, no human beings could cut down trees, the plantation had to be nurtured, created a sustainable environment of growth for sustenance and food. Just two examples I'll give you of how he practically looked at the situation, which was awful in that region, and the way the tribes and the dominating financial powers were doing things in an exploitative way, and he created alternatives. This is the sunnah. This is the practice we have to do. We have to use our intelligence, look at the time and place, establish the virtues and the ethical principles, and then operate policy. Be open-minded and creative in the way we develop those policies which are good for all, not for the few.
Mr. Clive, what are your conclusive thoughts? When I see and look at the situation around the globe, it looks like it's the time when everyone is liberating from something they understood. So, what are your conclusive thoughts on overall discussion? We just have left like 2 minutes, so I'm so sorry about the time, but it's like we are ending. So,
Well, I think one needs to recognise that as crazy as everything seems at the moment, this is symptomatic of the replacement of a dying system. In nature, you don't get new life without death, as decay actually nurtures the new life. So we are going through a difficult time. It may get more difficult, but what lies beyond is something way beyond our current imagination, because we're going to totally transform the way we live. The signs are there economically, socially, cosmically. And largely this is born of what we've been talking about, which is truth versus lies. Many of the lies are defended by laws or people being attacked for who they are, rather than actually attacking the substance of the case. They attack the people. The truth is emerging, and the truth is like a lion. You don't need to defend it. Let it loose, and it will defend itself. That was said by Aurelius Augustinus, I don't know how many years ago, and that's as true today as ever. And the truth is fighting like a lion, and it's spreading fast. So I feel quite optimistic about the future.
Thank you so much. Sister Sundat, if you want to add, just we have few seconds left, like half a minute. So.
Okay, inshallah, we do believe that it's time for the civilization across the globe to cooperate together. It's a time for, as the Western theorists used to say, that it's a time for clashes between civilizations. It's time for cooperation, and together, inshallah, we will spread justice, and we will take over the banner of justice across the globe, and get rid of this colonialist power, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you so much, Sister Sundar. Thank you so much, Mr. Clive, and thank you so much, Muslim Bhai. I'm really honored to have you all on the show for this important discussion. And to the viewers, I would just say, like, as Agha Khamenei, Reverend Muazzam, Supreme Leader of Iran, has expressed his views in his letter. You all read it, understand it, and connect to the Quran. If you really care about humanity, if you really care about truth, justice, and human values, which have been which have died under material world. So we have to revive, and we have to liberate ourselves from the things going on, and connect ourselves to the Quran. Just read it as a student of truth, justice, and peace, and you will learn a lot and understand the better reality of this world and what we need to do about it. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Allah Hafiz.